Hello, everyone. Welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today, I brought for you all October November 2024 2281 variant 23. We'll be doing section A, compulsory data response question today. Let's dive quickly into the paper. The case study talks about Belarus. They've given us different statistics for Belarus economy. First, they've given us a fact file, a table, which yields in different statistics for the year 2021, revealing the situation of the economy that Belarus had at that time. They've given us the number of cars produced for 32,000. The total cost of cars produced was $340.8 million. The labor force that was employed in the tertiary sector, that is the services sector, was 52%. That means nearly half of its population, the working population, was employed in the tertiary sector. And this gives us a sign of what? That it was almost towards a developed economy, right? Labor force employed in the public sector was 49%. This means that side by side there was a public sector as well as a private sector. So if 49% was employed in the public sector, 51% would have been employed in the private sector, right? So it gives us a form of a mixed economy in which there exists parallel a private sector as well as a public sector. The reason why I'm reading the case study and the important stats with you is so that you understand how to make inferences from the data available, so that once you are doing the questions, you have an idea of how to pick out the key information from the source and make advantage of it in your answers. Next, they talked about the share of output produced by the state-owned firm, which is 70%. That means 70% of the firms contributed towards the production. Inflation at that time was 9.9%, almost at 10%. Unemployment was 5.7%. Now, they're saying Belarus, a mixed economy, was one of the poorest in the Europe in the 1990s. Since then, the country's GDP per head has risen and poverty has been reduced. The country has also experienced a rise in the life expectancy. Table 1.1 shows life expectancy and the HDI in 6 selected countries in 2019. So initially, Belarus was struggling. It was poverty stricken and the situation was not that good. However, after that, from the 1990s, it recovered, its GDP rose, and the poverty level was reduced. Now, they've given us a statistics for 6 selected countries, including Belarus, that talks about the life expectancy in years and it also gives the HDI value side by side. Now, what I've done is I've actually, based on the life expectancy, I have mentioned in ascending order as to which country stands first. So if you look at the life expectancy, Norway stands first with 82.4 years. Next, it is US, which is 78.9%. Third is Thailand. Fourth is Belarus. Fifth is Tajikistan. Sixth is Uganda. So this is how, based on life expectancy, these countries rank. Between 2011 and 2021, it says there was a rise in the price level in Belarus. That means the country was experiencing high inflation. And what was the reason behind that? They mentioned it. Increases in the prices of energy pushed up the cost of production of firms in both the public sector and the private sector. That means the cause of this inflation was what? The energy prices, the fuel prices. And it affected both the firms in the private and the public sector equally. Over this period, that means again between 2011 and 2021, there was also an increase in investment in Belarus, a decline in the size of the country's labor force, and a decrease in the number of students going to university. So now, again, they are giving us a very crucial piece of information. They are saying that though between 2011 and 2021, there was a rise in the price of energy, which contributed towards high inflation, there were other 3 things also happening. What were the 3 things? There was an increase in investment in Belarus. There was a decline in the size of the country's labor force. That means the amount of population that was employed in the labor force, it fell. And there was also a decrease in the number of students going to university. So people, if they were going to university at that time, they switched, they dropped. The number of people who used to head for university for higher education, they dropped. Belarus produces a range of products Milk is one of the agricultural products that Belarus produces. That means it specializes in the production of milk. The country is the fifth largest producer of milk in the world and ranks fifth if you talk about ranking worldwide. The Belarus government is reluctant to subsidize the production of milk, but it has provided large loans for the mechanization of the dairy industry. Though the government is reluctant in providing subsidies, however, it has provided loans because it wants mechanization, it wants its production process to be what? Automated, right? It maybe aims to increase the productivity and the efficiency of its dairy production. So it aimed at the mechanization, and in this way, it contributed by providing loans. The Belarus government wants to encourage the production and purchase of electric vehicles. Next, it wants to stimulate the purchase and the use of the EVs, the electric vehicles. It plans to build 1,300 electrical vehicle charging stations by 2030. And in order to boost the use of EVs, it plans to set up 1,300 of these charging stations by the end of 2030. The use of electric vehicles can have beneficial environmental effects, and the reason why it plans to do so is because it aims at achieving environmental efficiency, environmentally friendly options it wants to introduce. However, some of the other forms of transport may provide more benefits, and some people and firms may be reluctant to switch to buying EVs. However, the government also has an idea that maybe they might not get such a good response as they expect because people might be reluctant, or else the other options that are already available, that is conventional means of transport, it might be better, right? In terms of maybe less expensive options, right? A more unpopular government measure that was introduced in 2015 was a law which imposed fines on those who were unemployed for 6 months or more. Now, what it did further in 2015 was that those who had been unemployed for the time being of 6 months or more, they were being penalized, they were being fined. The government used to impose a fine on them for being unemployed for more than 6 months or more. Anyone who did not pay the sum of money by the government for breaking the law was jailed, and anyone who did not used to pay this fine was used to put into prison. This may have reduced frictional unemployment if suitable jobs were available. However, some of the unemployment might have been structural or cyclical. However, this law was ended in 2018. Now, they say that yes, this fining or this penalty imposition was fruitful in eliminating the type of inflation that was caused by frictional unemployment. However, if the unemployment was caused by structural or cyclical, made little or no difference to that type of unemployment. However, the law was abolished in 2018. So after 3 years, it was abolished, right? It was no longer implemented. So far, so good. I hope you've understood the case study. Let's look at the questions. All right. The first question number 1, part A. Now look at the key terms. The key term is calculate the average cost of producing a car in Belarus in 2021. It's a 1-mark question. All you need to do is calculate. What do they want? The average cost of producing a car. Now, look at the right-hand side. This is where I have solved it for you all. I'll scroll in where I extracted the data from the source so that you will also understand where did I collected the information, and then I'll show you the calculation on my right to see how I derived at the correct answer. All right. Now they are asking us what? They are asking us for the average cost of producing a car in Belarus in 2021. How do you calculate the average cost? The total cost of the cars divided by the number of cars produced. How will you calculate it? The total cost of cars divided by the number of cars produced. And how did I get that value? Look into the first table. The very first piece of information tells us the total cost of cars, 340.8 million. And what was the total number of cars produced? 32,000. So 340.8 million into a 1 million divided by 32,000. Why I am doing it? In order to arrive at the correct answer, right? We'll convert it. And once you divide it, the answer you will get is $10,650. So the average cost, that is one car that is produced in Belarus, that was produced in Belarus in 2021, costed $10,650. So in $10,650, Belarus produced a single car in 2021. I hope you all have understood. All right. You've done that, you've shown the working, you've derived the correct answer, you got 1 mark. Let's look at part B. Part B says, identify 2 reasons why Belarus is described as a mixed economy. So now the key term is identify. You just have to pick out that piece of evidence that suggests that yes, Belarus is a mixed economy. How many marks? 2 marks. So you just need to state which elements in the data source tells you or give you an idea that yes, Belarus was a mixed economy. So the first reason is that yes, there exists a public and a private sector. And the second was state-owned firms. The mention of this phrase, I'll show you where. Now, if you look at again the data source, see here, it says increases in the price of energy pushed up the cost of production of firms in both the public and the private sector, right? So the fuel prices affected both the firms in the private and the public sector. This suggests again, yes, that there was a mixed economy. Why? Because there exists parallel, a mixed private and a public sector, and yet there were labor force employed in the public sector, or you could say the share of output produced by the state-owned firms, 70%. If the state-owned firm produced 70%, that means 30% share of output was produced by the firms in the private sector. So these are the 2 pieces of evidence that suggest that yes, Belarus was a mixed economy. You mentioned that, straight 2 marks. Moving on, part C. Part C says explain, so the keyword over here is explain, the type of inflation experienced by Belarus. It's a 2-mark question. Now, how will the marks be allocated? 1 mark for the reason. What type of inflation? For identification of the type of inflation. If you've identified the type of inflation, 1 mark, and 1 mark for the reasoning. So what do you think is the type of inflation that exists in Belarus? Remember, what did they tell us? They told us the fuel prices. And fuel prices is what? Cost push inflation. So you've identified that yes, Belarus was experiencing cost push inflation. And what makes you say that would yield you the 2nd mark. The 1st mark, once you've identified cost push inflation. The 2nd mark you will get once you give a reasoning why do you say that it was experiencing cost push inflation. So you'll say yes, Belarus was experiencing cost push inflation because an increase or a rise in the energy prices increase the cost of production of firms both in the private and the public sector. You mentioned that, full 2 marks. I hope you've understood. Part D. Explain 2 reasons why the production possibility curve of Belarus may have shifted to the left between 2011 and 2021. Now they are asking us, give 2 reasons accompanied with his explanation. Why do you think the PPC curve could have shifted inwards? When we are shifting inwards, that means towards the left between 2011 and 2021. Now they are asking us for 2 reasons. It's a 4-mark question. How will we distribute the allocation of marks? 1 mark each for the reasons and 1 mark each for the explanation of each of the reasons. Get it? Now, we know that the PPC shifts inwards or outwards due to 2 prime reasons. Either due to the quality of the factors of production or the quantity of the factors of production. Either there has been factors that contributes towards the shift in the quality or in the quantity. So now we'll identify 1 factor that contributes towards the quality of the factors of production, and we'll identify the 2nd factor which contributes towards the quantity of the factors of production. So the first one is there was a fall in the quantity of economic resources or the factors of production. How? The first reason I've identified is that there was a reduction in the size of the country's labor force. Remember, they told us here that between 2011, that though there was a rise in the price, but what did we identify? That there was also an increase in investment, a decline in the size of the country's labor force. You see that? I'll erase it to make it clear. There was a decline in the size of the country's labor force. So this is a decline, a reduction in the quantity of the factors of production, a quantity in the labor force. You've identified it. What contributed towards the fall in the quality of the economic resources? The number of students going to university also declined. Right? So the number of students going to university also declined. Now you'll explain it. Since there was a fall in the country's labor force, this means there was less labor employed. The country's size of the labor force shrank, the country's working population shrank. This means that less output was produced. As a result, the country was producing less than its potential output. As a result, the entire PPC curve shifted. The country was not utilizing its factors of production to its max. It was producing at a point below its productive potential. It was not on its PPC, it was on a point inside the curve. Get it? Now, increase a fall in the quality of economic resources. How? Because once there was a fall in the number of people who opted for university education, this means there was a fall in the pool of qualified or skilled labor force. As a result, there was a fall in the quality of the production level, right? So the quality of the goods and services that could have been produced elsewise was comparatively less. As a result, the PPC curve shifted inwards towards the left. Get my point? So 1 mark each for the identification, 1 mark each for the explanation. You'll get full 4 marks. I hope you've understood it. Moving on. Part E. Part E says analyze the relationship between life expectancy and HDI value. Now, HDI is Human Development Index. They are asking us to analyze what sort of a relationship exists between life expectancy and Human Development Index. Now, recalling HDI is what? HDI is a measure of standard of living which has 3 components: life expectancy, GDP per head, and education. So life expectancy is actually one of the components of HDI, which they have mentioned in the table over here in this data response question, right? In this source material. So now we'll move to this table, 1.1. We'll use it to solve this question. How many marks this question is awarded? 4 marks. Now, first you will tell me what type of a relationship exists, whether it has a direct relationship or an indirect relationship, a positive relationship or a negative relationship. The first step calls for this. The first step towards answering analyzed question in section A is for you to determine what sort of relationship exists, a positive or a negative, a direct or an indirect. And how will you identify that? By looking at what is happening to the figures between the 2 variables they have identified. So what are the 2 variables they are talking about in this part? What are the 2 variables? First, identify them. The first is life expectancy, the second is HDI. Now you look at what is happening to each of the figures of these 2 variables as you move forward, right? So now if you look at Norway, the life expectancy was 82.4, the HDI value was 0.957. The second stood was US, when it was 78.9, the HDI value was 0.926. So this means what? The higher the life expectancy, the higher the HDI value. So this means what? It's a positive relationship. It's a direct relationship. So increases in life expectancy causes increases in HDI value. Or you can say there exists a positive or a direct relationship between HDI and life expectancy. Either of the mentioning of the 2 and you'll get 1 mark. Now, what makes you say that? You'll give a reasoning, you give a justification. For instance, you will say Norway has the highest life expectancy of 82.4 years. Therefore, it has the highest HDI of 0.957. It is followed by the US, which has a life expectancy of 78.9 years. Therefore, it has an HDI value of 0.926. Or you can mention the countries which have the lowest life expectancy. For instance, Tajikistan stands the second on the lowest, 71.1 years, which is an HDI value of 0.668. And the lowest is of Uganda, 63.4 years. Therefore, it has an HDI value that is least among the 6 countries of 0.544. Again, you mentioned that, you've gotten the 2nd mark. However, there exists an irregularity, there exists an anomaly, there exists an exception. Now, what's the exception? If you look closely, which is the 3rd country? Thailand. Now, if you look at Thailand, I'll zoom in. If you look at Thailand's life expectancy was 77.2 and its HDI value is 0.777. If you look at Belarus, its life expectancy is 74.8. It stands in the fourth position and its HDI value is 0.823. Its HDI value is 0.823. So if Belarus is on the fourth position and Thailand is on the third position, so HDI value of Belarus should have been lesser than Thailand. Thailand should have been having a higher HDI value since it stands on the third position. So Thailand should have been having an HDI value higher in comparison to Belarus. But what is happening in actually? Belarus is having an HDI value that is larger. So what will you say? You'll say there exists an anomaly that though Belarus has a life expectancy of 74.8 years, its HDI value is 0.823, which is higher than Thailand's of 0.777. You've mentioned that, you got in the third mark. The final fourth mark you'll get by giving the reason. And what will be the reason for this anomaly? You say, because there are other components in the HDI. It could be because of differences in education, or it could be because of differences in GDP per head. It could be that Belarus has a higher education level or a higher GDP per head that makes it contribute towards a higher HDI value. Get it? This could be the reason. So once you've mentioned that, full 4 marks would be awarded to you. Moving on, part F. Part F talks us to analyze using a demand and a supply diagram the effect of subsidizing milk production on the market for milk. Now they are asking us to draw a demand and a supply diagram showing us what would be the effect on the supply of production of milk. Now it's of 5 marks. How will the marks be distributed? 4 marks would go for the correct construction of the diagram and 1 mark will be awarded for its explanation. Now, how are 4 marks going to be awarded for the diagram? 1 mark for the correct drawing of the axis, 1 mark for the correct demand in the supply curves, the initial demand in the supply curve, 1 mark for the shift in the supply curve, and 1 mark for showing the equilibrium position. This is how the full 4 marks are going to be awarded to you. So what you will do is on the vertical axis, you will display the price of milk. On the horizontal axis, you will display the quantity of milk. Initial demand curve is D, initial supply curve is S, and E is the initial equilibrium position, with P the initial price and Q the initial quantity. Get it? Now, once the subsidy is provided, the supply curve is going to shift from S to S1 towards the right, causing the price to fall from P to P1 and the quantity demanded and the quantity sold to increase from Q to Q1. Right? As a result, the price has fallen from P to P1. You will give this explanation that the provision of subsidy has caused the supply curve to shift towards the right. As a result, the price fell from P to P1 and the quantity demanded and the quantity sold rose from Q to Q1. This is what happened to the price of milk. You've mentioned the explanation, you've drawn the correct construction of the diagram, you'll get full 5 marks. All right. Moving on. Part G. Part G is a discuss question. It's a 6-mark question. It's asking us discuss whether or not the construction of electric vehicle charging stations would benefit an economy. So now they are asking if an economy decides to have charging stations, EV charging stations, would it be beneficial or not? Again, it's a 6-mark question. You will need to produce a balanced argument using both sides, exceeding not up to for at least you'll mention 4 points for each side, producing a balanced argument with an evaluation, with a proper chain link analysis, right? In order for you to achieve full 4 to 6 marks, right? The higher tier band. All right. So if you say that yes, the construction of electric vehicle charging stations would be beneficial for an economy, what makes you say that? First, you will say that yes, the charging stations are complements to the electric vehicles, right? So if the country decides to set up more of its charging stations, the demand for its electric vehicles would increase, right? As a result, what would happen? The employment level in the country would rise. And as a result, the standard of living of the country would rise. The people would be experiencing higher income. Their purchasing power would increase. It would be beneficial for the entire economy. And the country would be experiencing economic growth. There would be more production, more output uh, available for even exports. The country would be having more of foreign exchange. And the country would be having a favorable position in its current account also, right? Plus, the production of electric vehicles is supposed to be more environment friendly. There would be less carbon emission. And as a result, it would support the environmental goals of the country as well, right? It would help lower the carbon emissions and reduce the economic burden of even healthcare costs if they are linked to air pollution. Plus, it would contribute towards less depletion of natural resources. If previously you were dependent on fossil fuels or uh, imported fuels. So there would be less dependency on that, and the country would be saving its foreign exchange. And also, it would encourage innovation because once you are setting up electric vehicles, you will be promoting innovation, investment in electric vehicles. Infrastructure can drive in advancement in clean energy, better battery technology, in implementing smart grids, right? So it would further lead towards more economic opportunities, right? And it would be beneficial for the country then. However, it might also be that the construction of electric vehicle charging stations might not be beneficial for an economy. Why? Because initially, the cost of setting up these EV stations is high. It involves high fixed costs, it involves high initial costs, it requires a larger amount of investment, and the construction and maintenance of these charging stations would maybe cause a burden and require substantial investment, and which may strain the government if it's already facing some financial crunch. There would be loss of business to conventional car businesses productions if those conventional car businesses, they would suffer from a fall in their demand, and there would be unemployment of the workers in their traditional car industries, and their suppliers would experience a fall in their demand, right? And there would be unemployment of those workers. However, it could also be that people might be reluctant to switch to electric vehicles. They might be more comfortable with their conventional car systems. It could also be that the government is now investing in the setup of these electric vehicle charging stations. So it involves opportunity cost. Why? Because the government has scarce resources and it might be beneficial for the country, instead of investing in setting up of these electric charging stations, construction of dams, or maybe healthcare or education spending on those areas would be beneficial. Or it could also be that the other options that are already available are more friendly or more better for the country. So then the conclusion would be that the construction of the electric vehicle charging stations can be beneficial for an economy in the long run. Why? Because it involves a high fixed cost, or the setup costs are high. And but before a country decides to set up the electric vehicle charging stations, it must weigh the advantages with its costs. And if it thinks that yes, the employment level rises, or if its dependency on non-renewable energy sources uh, reduces, dependency on fossil fuel reduces, and if it is better for the economy, if it gives a better friendly environmental option, then it must go for it. right? So it must meticulously weigh the advantages with the disadvantages and then decide. All right, let's move on to the final part, part H. Part H says discuss whether or not people should be fined for being unemployed. All right, so now if we say that, again, it's a 6 mark question, again, you'll provide a balanced argument. If you first say that yes, the people should be fined, if you give reasons for supporting fines for the unemployed, you'll say, yes, it might be beneficial if you want to reduce frictional unemployment. If you want people to go for the first job offer and reduce the time people spend in searching for jobs, it would reduce frictional unemployment. If you want to reduce the dependency on unemployment benefits, the government would have to spend less on provision of unemployment benefits and it would use its scarce resources maybe for infrastructure or for economic growth. Hence, unemployment would be reduced and more people would be employed in the labor force. As a result, the output would rise, the scale of production would expand, the standard of living would improve, it would boost exports because there would be more production. As a result, the current account would be in a favorable situation. Since the people are now being employed and they are better off, they would be enjoying better healthcare options and productivity would rise. Plus, if the fines are being imposed and it would be reducing frictional unemployment, would be a source of revenue for the firm, for the government, and it would be utilized by the government. However, you could say that no, the imposition of fines might not be beneficial because it would be demotivating the employees and it would be pressurizing them who are already under strain by being unemployed. And people who are already financially hit, it might worsen up the situation. It could be that in order to pay fines, they might be getting involved in crimes or they might be borrowing, right? It would first further worsen of their situation. Or it could be that they are making a compromise or accepting low paid jobs or jobs which do not match their skill set, leading towards further demotivation, right? Further reducing their morale or reducing their productivity and decreasing their job satisfaction and reducing their interest level, right? So it might negatively impact or hamper their productivity level, the efficiency level. It could also be that it would not be beneficial in reducing structural or cyclical unemployment that requires retraining or that requires updating of skills, or that unemployment that was caused by company closures or by economic downturns that was involuntary. It might not address the imposition of fines, might not be beneficial in such a situation. Therefore, now what should be the conclusion? The conclusion should be that rather than imposing fines, government should focus on policies that would create job opportunities, that would address the root cause of unemployment, that would provide skill development programs and provide policies that create jobs, provide, job information, help meet the employers with the employees and help the unemployed find jobs, addressing the root causes of unemployment in a more effective and ethical approach, right? I hope you all have understood and enjoyed solving this paper with me. I'll be back with more such questions. Stay tuned, subscribe, share. Happy learning.